We're going to wait about 5 more minutes or so, or 3 minutes with few people. Just a few people I think are on their way. So we'll be right back. Okay, everybody. I think, see Kent, I see you come in, so we're holding the show for you. No problem. Well, welcome everybody to the meeting. We appreciate your working with us on both the time and the time of day and the shift from last time, from the 6th to now, because of all the things that had come up. See, we do have, what KUB commissioners do we have? I see Kathy, Claudia are here, and Jerry Askew. So appreciate the commissioners being here, and again, the whole idea was, make sure that all the discussion we heard that was also that was such that commissioners could be aware of it as well. So we appreciate their attendance. Before we get going, I did refer to the schedule. We like to see about the next meeting how everybody felt about continuing at 3 as we are today, or whether we should return to the later time or adjust it. I mean, 3 works fine for me, but how does that, I guess, without going to formalities of doodle polls and so on, how is anybody find 3 not acceptable or not workable? KUB, the folks have let me know that this facility is available at 3 for our meeting times. Oh, that was intentional. No. We'll ask them. Yeah, good point. Well, if there's no objection for now, we will consider that we'll have the next meeting at 3, and then we will reach out to some of the other folks and make sure that doesn't create too much of a burden. If it does, we'll then switch to 6. I know for a Steve that 3 works way better.
This is a huge help.
Okay.
I feel like I've been incredibly dormant until now. So.
Well, welcome out of dormancy. Glad to have you. No, we appreciate it, and I know the challenge you have with your twins and vaccination status and all of that. So, thank you for participating.
So you anticipate that we were on a first Thursday timeline after that slip. What's your concept of the next meeting timing?
Well, yeah, you're right. The first Thursday in February will come up pretty quickly. Let's see, we could shift to, or do you want to go back to?
The reason I asked
yeah.
is I'm working under the assumption that this will be the last presentation on rates by KUB, and that we're going to create an opportunity for some members of the advisory committee to present some information.
Right.
So I think, at least from our perspective, because we would like to be one of the groups that presents, we would welcome a little more time because it's going to be compressed.
Right.
I'm not saying we have to go a full month, but I think it would be better to have more than 2 weeks.
Very reasonable. Let me see. Elba or Liz, is the room available? Do you know? Have you checked its availability, assuming the early part of the month as on schedule, with this being the outlier? So I guess we'll continue for now. Yeah, we'll assume we'll go back to the first Thursday after this one. So
if you wanted to meet the first Thursday of March
yeah, I mean, if we end today and we want to then open it up, then the first Thursday in March would work. So that would leave out a February meeting, which at this point I think is probably viable. I mean,
Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling about whether because, yeah, I mean,
okay.
I don't want to speak for other people, but for me, it would be fine to do it. I need to check with my staff because I'll probably have some staff support to do the presentation, but
right.
I think that shooting for the first Thursday of March would work.
Okay. Why don't we, yes, Kent?
I'm sorry, I think I'm going to leave. I just got notice that another family member has come down with a COVID.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm symptom-free and testing negative so far with those cheap home tests, but my daughter says you shouldn't be out at a meeting if you've got 3 family members that are sick. And the COVID is certainly getting people now that it wasn't getting before. So I think I'm going to, out of respect for you all, leave the meeting.
Well, thank you. And as of now, it looks like the next one is going to be the first Thursday in March.
Okay.
Given that's the 20th of January. Is that
All right,
okay
great,
with
great.
everybody, do you think?
Well, I look forward to the minutes of this meeting and to everybody's intelligent contributions.
Okay. Yeah, hope you're well.
Yeah, I hope so too. So far, I feel well.
Okay. So next meeting will be the first one in March, and then at the end, we'll see where we are at the end today and then see what next steps are. Okay. Did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes from last time? Everybody okay with those? Very well. Well, that leaves us back to continue our journey into KUB rate structure and rates, and Mike has been incredibly patient and thorough with us. So I guess we will turn it back over to Mike to continue, see if we can wrestle this beast to the ground.
Okay, well, thank you very much. First, I want to apologize for not being available the first part of January and messing up everybody's schedules. I've been dealing with a lot of family issues associated with an elderly parent. It has been a very trying time for me, so I apologize for that. But I think Dr. Smith's right. My goal, or our goal today, ought to be to finish this, at least the presentation that I've been making. And y'all been patient as we work through all these times, going through the data. And then today, we're going to talk a little bit more about where KUB is now, and a whole lot less about theory and a whole lot more about a little bit of history and where we are right now. So with that said, let me get started here. I think somewhere down y'all's journey as a customer advisory panel, you heard a lot about the history of KUB. And as I sit here as a fairly tenured member of KUB, a lot of the history around KUB has been driven by the acquisition of the wastewater system. And the acquisition of the wastewater system ultimately resulted in, as most of you are aware, us coming under an agreement with EPA to spend a lot of money on the wastewater system to address issues related to it. The system that we acquired from the city had deficiencies that had to be addressed. The graph I've shown here encompasses not only wastewater being in green, but it encompasses the capital spending on all of our systems. When the wastewater system ultimately, we came into agreement with EPA on our spending on the wastewater system went from about $1 million a month to roughly $1 million a week or more. Yeah, so certain times more than that. So, fourfold increase in our capital spending on wastewater. That whole experience was a really traumatic experience for KUB, and not only for the staff, the KUB entity, but also for the board. The board felt that somehow or another they didn't want this to happen again. They really felt strongly that something that happened under their watch, they didn't want to have that same thing happen in the other utilities. Okay, I'm not saying that the board was responsible for what happened in wastewater. We acquired something that had deficiencies, and we had to fix that. But as a result of the experiences of wastewater, the board decided, hey, we need to make investments in our other utility systems the same way. And what the chart shows here, if you look at, let's say, for example, in the red, you'll see red being the expenditures on the electric system. The board started what we have called and still call a Century 2 effort, the second century of existence, and making infrastructure investments to bring the system and replace, renew, refurbish, if you will. So if you look at the electric system, for example, the electric system spending more than doubled in capital once the program started. Same thing occurred in the water system. All the systems had between a double to up to 4 times of capital spending that has been undertaking over the last 20 years to try to make sure that our systems are robust, reliable, and in a shape that the customers deserve it to be in. And again, it was a very intentional set of decisions that went over a long period of time by multiple boards over the years. But the result of it all, though, as you see, consent decree, where wastewater first started, we went several years while we were making plans on and looking at funding mechanisms for water, electric, and gas, how we would fund that, how we would accomplish that before we then launched the Century 2. I would tell you in between where the consent decree was and where Century 2 started, there was a recession. And we were poised to launch the rehabilitation, the reinvestment in our systems during that recession, and it got pushed back because the funding mechanisms and the rate increases associated with that was judged to not be the right time to do that. But ultimately, we now have the same type of advanced investments in our utility infrastructure that we didn't have before. And again, all that really comes out of the wastewater and the experiences associated with the wastewater. So a very dramatic increase, you know, from $60 million a year to $160 to $200 million a year of investment we were spending replacing things. So one of our sessions we talked about, gosh, rates are really an outcome of financing. Rates are really an outcome of the planning process. And the capital investment that we're making in the system came from decisions endorsed by the board of what we need to do to get our systems in shape. But the capital investments require money, and there are a couple of ways of getting that money.
Mike, before you
Yeah. Uh-huh.
on this particular slide, and I'm eyeballing it from a distance.
Sure.
Could I request that you share with us the actual percentage increases for each of the utilities? Because it looks like to me that, and I understand the electrical was probably second to the wastewater when Century 2 was going on, but it looks like that the electrical has experienced more significant investment than the others relative to where it started. And you'd mentioned that everybody doubled or maybe even went 4 times. It'd be helpful to see that numerically as opposed to graphically so that we could understand the percentages, and maybe that's about to come.
No,
And the last thing I'd ask, and this may be a question to the board, is, and I don't want to misconstrue this because I like my electric power to be on just like everybody else, but what's the process that is gone through to distinguish between prudent investment, which we all strongly support, and kind of gold plating the system, which may be you have the ability to get the money and you can do all kinds of things that theoretically would get you an extra 0.9999, whatever it is, in reliability. How do you all go through that process, and how do you present it to the board to distinguish what is the appropriate level of what your recommendation is versus reliability versus sort of maybe as an engineering department over-engineering something?
Well, let me answer your first question first. I'm happy to provide all the data associated with this slide, and there's nothing secret about all this. Sure. This is just a dependent of history of financial reports, basically is all this is. To your next question, I will tell you I was over the construction system, all the construction forces for several years. There ain't enough money for me to spend as a construction person to fix things. So I'll just say that. And I wish we had unlimited dollars to gold plate things. I was always struggling to convince people that I needed more just to keep things the way they were. As far as the process that went through for making those judgments, there is a planning process that we talked about in one of the earlier sessions that's gone on to look forward in time and have a discussion with the board about what the needs are, what can we afford, what can our customers afford, and what should we be planning around. I don't know if that answers your question, but I wish we were in a position to gold plate things. I'll just say that.
Being from engineering, I'll tell you, I'd spent a lot of time on this. We were a good example. If we know a pipe's going to last 50 years, and that pipe's 51 years old, we need to start thinking about replacing it. So it was a lot of data pulling from that, you know, history of breaks, history of length of outages, number of outages, you know, whatever it is, and using that to make a decision on when to replace it. Because I'll tell you, 12, 15 years ago, we were behind the curve. It was breaking faster and we were fixing it. And so we had to make some investments to get it caught up. But we use a lot of data. We don't just, it's not just a wing in it, or it's It's a lot of data-driven decisions. The simplest way to put it, if a pole lasts this long or a pipe lasts that long, you kind of know you got to average that over a course of that life. That's one way to start it. Then you go beyond that with data like analytics, histories. We do a great job of collecting, information from our system every day. And so we try to, because we don't want to raise rates. That's not our goal. It's to say what's the right balance. But when you have a little bit of a history of being behind, you do a little catch up initially to get there. So, but we'd be glad I can have that discussion until I'm blue in the face, and love to have that discussion with you further. So,
Yeah.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
So with these Century 2 investments, what is the projections going forward? I mean, I know you can't read the future, but having spent all this money on all these systems, I see 20 to 21 goes down. Do you expect a trend to continue?
Mark can answer that better than me.
I think the drop in 21 was more related to the pandemic and just a deferral on work of some big projects, particularly for the water and wastewater systems. Even you see electric came down as well. So that was more related to that. For wastewater, for the green, once we get past the consent decree, you're going to see more of a leveling off and a bit of a reduction on that as far as just the capital spend. Mm-hmm. I think gas will continue to be relatively consistent as well. Water investments are needed. Mm-hmm. So water in the short term will probably go up because we have some major plant projects that need to be addressed.
Yeah, one of the things to remember, we named this Century 2 because it's realistic. Mm-hmm. We built the system 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. Power poles last 50 years, and then it's got to be replaced. Well, guess what? We're just now starting to replace a whole lot of stuff that was built over several generations. So as a utility, pipes last 100 years, depending on the type of pipe. But eventually it's got to be replaced. And we're just now started within the past couple of decades of replacing a whole lot of stuff that was done years and years ago. And so I think the level of spending, like Mark said, is probably going to be consistent going forward as we are gradually replacing historical assets.
Now, electric is actually going to go up, but we've talked about that before with the broadband and the fiber system. Mm-hmm. Over the next 5, 6, 7 years. It's actually going to increase. I think our projection is we'll spend about $1.2 billion in electric capital over the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
So doing the capital investments, as we talked about in our financing sort of section, there's two ways that we get money to do capital work. The first one's through debt, and the second one's through rates. Those are the only two funding mechanisms we have. And if you remember the last chart, if you look at the escalation in the debt levels associated with a utility, I don't know a whole lot, but I'll just use the word dramatic. There's been a dramatic escalation over the past 20 years in the debt levels of our utility associated with the asset replacements that we undertook to make sure that our systems were robust and reliable. From a level of less than $200 million to over $1 billion. And it's spread across all the utilities, with a whole lot of it being in wastewater. In wastewater, there was so much needs, and we were under such a fast timeline from the EPA that you couldn't do it with rates as much. You had to use debt. Otherwise, it would be crushing, and it's crushing anyway to a large extent now. I'm not comfortable with it the way it is, but a ton of debt was issued across these time frames. And again, all that was done in consultation with the board on all of the board meetings about what's the right lever. You got two levers. You got rates and you got debt. How should we go about financing these expenditures once you've decided that we've got to invest, either through the EPA making us or through us looking forward saying, hey, everything's getting old, we better start making some replacements. The escalation of debt was one of the funding mechanisms for that. So this utility has really leveraged up over time. I'm not trying to be so dramatic to say we've done something wrong. I'm just saying it's compared to where we started, there's significantly more debt on this utility. I think about TVA. TVA has billions of dollars, right? Well, we're in the $1 billion category here too now. Nothing, it's really kind of astounding to me over the period of time. The other way of funding the capital expenditures that was really originally because of wastewater, again, is through rates. I've chosen electric here to be yes, sir.
I'm sorry, back on the last slide, I just want to add a quick question.
Uh-huh.
Is all the debt generally the same characterization, or are there some debt that is maybe due payable sooner than later, or is it all homogeneous, or is it all just of the same?
This is that person.
Yeah, the debt person, thanks. Typically, when we issue bonds, they're fixed rate, long-term bonds, have a 30-year maturity. Some amount matures each year over time. So it's typically a levelized payback structure. Interest is going to be somewhat higher on the front end, and then as you pay more and more principal, the interest component comes down. So it's an equal amount each year for a particular bond issue. But obviously, the systems differ, but as far as it's fixed rate, it's 30-year term, we do that for all of the systems.
Okay.
But if we were saying, let's take this out, and as far as the outstanding debt we're showing here, if we were just going to say you're going to stop today and not do any more, which isn't realistic, when does it all basically paid off? 2050.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if there was any potential pressure on the rates to go up because of certain notes being, due sooner than later. So, of course, given the maturity, that would be different. But okay, thank you.
So in addition to the debt to fund the capital expenditures, there's also rate increases. That's the other of the two levers to pay for the capital expenditures. I've just used the one for electric here, showing the electric rate increase history for you. There would be a similar chart for all utilities. Electric seems to get a lot of the angst around it, so I chose it. But you can see over the history, and by the way, I actually started working for KUB about right there, so I've been through all this. And so for decades there's very few electric rate increases. And I would say water may be different, but the gas and electric is probably fairly consistent with this chart right here. And then you can notice that when Century 2 started, we had to start raising rates. It was a combination of debt and rate increases that has financed all of our capital expenditures to start replacing assets. And in the case of electric here, you can see we had consistent, fairly small rate increases. If you go back in time to 2003, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, but we were criticized by folks that, hey, they'd just as soon have smaller regular increases than one large increase. So actually there was method to the madness here on having small regular rate increases as opposed to a larger rate increase when you can get away with it. Do you have a question?
I do. I believe I'm correct, but I think terminology really matters here, and we need to be really precise. I think that spurt of increased revenue generation through non-bonds or non-debt is actually fees that were applied to the bill versus rates. And I think it's very important for everyone to understand that there's a difference between a fixed fee and a rate that is applied, a rate increase that is applied to the variable rate. Because if it is applied to the variable rate, it sends a market signal to the customer that encourages conservation and energy efficiency because you're sending that market signal. If you are applying a fixed fee, it actually does the exact opposite. It discourages that market signal. And for those of us who are investing in things like solar and others, in addition to energy efficiency appliances, The fixed fee is also discourages that. And so I think it's important to not characterize these, if I'm correct, now if I'm wrong, please correct, but I think these are fee increases that you all applied over a period of time on the fixed fee portion of the bill. And there may be also some variable rate in there, but I think we need to tease those apart because they have a different impact on customer behavior.
Number one, you're right. These were ultimately applied to the basic service charge portion of the bill, consistently on the case of electric, and in most of the other rate increases associated with capital improvements, they were also associated with the fixed fees. Again, we're paying off long-term assets, making long-term investments. It's almost like an installment plan on the rates. But you're right, those were fixed fees. Does it make a difference to somebody in the bill? I don't know. Terminology matters to you. We'll use your terminology. It was definitely on the fixed fee portion. The discussion amongst the board and staff at the time was, when all this was originally formulated and through the years, was they wanted it to be equally shared by everybody to have the same type of investment and in the system, if you will. Typically, if you looked on the electric system, it was $1 a month. We went up $1 a month on everybody's bill each time we did one of those rate increases, more or less. You know, some of them, there might have been $1.50, I think. Mark may remember more than me, but roughly, and for everybody that anybody talked to, it was $1. It wasn't $1.50 for you and 50 cents for her. I mean, it was $1 for everybody. I mean, there was that to this madness here, if you will. It was how it was applied. And
we did look back at, I remember the time, at the basic service charges or the fixed fee across the whole valley, and we were very, very low. We were down around $6 or something. We were in that lower quartile, lower decile at the time. So that was part of the decision-making process as well.
Well, I understand that. I think, Mark, if I understand what you're saying, is you're implying that applying the fixed fee may be the fairest way to approach everybody across the board. I think we would beg to differ with that because I think it has a higher impact on lower use customers. And I think it has a higher percentage impact because obviously if you're consuming, you live in a 7,000 square foot house and you're consuming a very large amount of electricity, you're going to pay as a percentage of your overall usage, that dollar is less. But if you're living in a much smaller, in a trailer, or you're living in a smaller, that percentage is disproportionately higher. Now, I know we're going to end up having that debate at some point, but I just want to register that I don't think it is universally agreed that fixed fees are the fairest way to apply a impact to hit customers in a progressive way as opposed to what we would consider a regressive way.
well, I think you'll be happy the next 4 or 5 slides is all about everything you're talking about. Okay, so, yes.
Just a quick question. I am not educated enough to understand the customer behavior piece of this, but for this slide specifically that's up, the percentages here are fixed rate, variable rate, whatever, compared to customer payment, right? So essentially the bills went up 1%.
The bill went up, the bill went up 1%.
How we got there, but I just want to make
Yes.
sure I'm clear on these numbers.
Yes.
That this is the percentage. Okay, thank you.
Correct. Yes, you're exactly right. So after all these investments, after all this debt, after all this construction work that we've done, how do we compare to others? You know, at the end of the day, that's a measure that the board has to look at and that we have to talk to our customers about. So here are where our rates are versus peers. Upper left-hand corners on the electric system shows our rate, KUB in blue there. The comparison group here are the big TVA distributors. Start with Huntsville on the left, Memphis, Middle Tennessee Electric, which serves a swath from Lebanon to Murfreesboro to Franklin. They're actually a bigger electric utility than us, than KUB. EPB is Chattanooga. Volunteer is a co-op that serves from Georgia all the way up to Kentucky. North Georgia utility there would be next. They serve just south of Chattanooga down towards Dalton. And then the last one, NES, is Nashville. So you can see where our rates, after all this is spending, after all these rate increases, after everything, how do we compare? That's it, right there. Gas bills, same way. Gas, we compare more to our local neighbors. You really can't compare us to people in Nashville or Memphis or whatever, because you're so regionally focused on the pipeline that serves you. That's what drives your rates, is where you're getting your gas from. So really, it's just the people around us. Water, here's our comparison of water and the local water providers, and wastewater the same way. Wastewater, obviously, we're not competitive. The other utilities, we're fairly competitive. I would say we are competitive, even though we've had a dramatically increase in our capital spending and our debt levels and even on our rate increases. But our rate increases have been, it has left us still in a competitive position. Now,
Sorry, those are just straight averages, right? Straight averages, right? So average KUB bill for electric bill, average gas bill.
Based upon the average level of usage for a residential.
Okay.
yes, that's a better way to say it.
Thanks.
Average level usage. So getting back to Dr. Smith's observations, and want to have discussion about fixed fees, here are the components of the electric system's fixed fees of the chart I just showed you. So again, when we first started out, I think the very first session we had is what does a KUB bill look like, and what are the components of a KUB bill? And we talked about a KUB bill for a residential customer has two components to it. It has a basic service charge, which you could think of as a fixed fee, and then it has a commodity rate that's based upon your usage level times a rate. And here are the components of all the Big 8 electric system bills. And you'll see that at the end of the day, they're all fairly similar, even though the fixed fee portion of it varies very dramatically, right? So Huntsville Utilities got a $12 fixed fee. We've got a $20 fixed fee. At the end of the day, the rate of the total bill, again, let's talk about bill, are roughly similar, right? Across the board. So again, we're competitive. Our components of the bill are different. At the end of the day, you want to have a smaller fixed fee component, if you will. You'll have to make up whatever you go small here, you have to make it up with a big there, right? I mean, you still got to recover the same amount of dollars. It's just where you're recovering it from. And that's illustrated here in this chart, that everybody has a little different mix of it. So that's with the large distributors. How we compare to large distributors? Well, actually, there's 153, I think, TVA distributors. And here's how we compare to all the distributors, TVA distributors in the Valley. This represents 153 distributors, fixed fee. And they're just ordered and put up here. Our fixed fee is $20.50. The average fixed fee in the Valley is $19.83. We are not down here. To Dr. Smith's point, we are not down here. We're also not here. We're right here, okay? Again, I would suggest that we're competitive not only in the total bill we charge, but also in the fixed fee portion of the bill. This is getting a little more complicated. This is getting a whole lot more direct to Dr. Smith's question, though. If you take the fixed fee portion of the bill and you vary it, then depending upon your usage level, you get different rates. Again, we are competitive at the 1,000. We use the 1,000 because that's a typical kind of number. But if you compare just our fixed fee to others at the very start, if you don't use anything, we're higher than a lot of them, right? We're kind of halfway in there. At a 500 kW usage level, we're higher. We're definitely higher than several of them. You get to the average level, we're kind of average. You get to higher level, we're kind of lower. And that's a result of the mix of the fixed fee that Dr. Smith was talking about. Now, in his example, if we were EPB here, this is Chattanooga. Let's say we were Chattanooga. You'd say, well, gosh, they got a real low fixed fee here. They do. If you're kind of a small user, they're kind of in the middle. If you're an average user, they're more than us. If you're a larger user, you're a whole lot more than us, right? So the mixture or the balance between what's a fixed fee and what's a variable fee drives this mixture right here. And so the question is, as Dr. Smith said, depending upon what kind of customer you are, if you're a very small use customer, you want a small fixed fee. If you're a larger use customer, you would be better off with a larger fixed fee, right? I mean, that was.
Well, that's not exactly what I said. I mean, I said
I'm-
what is going to serve as a incentive for market behavior. And so y'all are incentivizing increased electric use over conservation and efficiency. And that's a choice you make. But, you know, it's not necessarily directionally where you could have made another choice.
Well, if I can add another commentary to it, this is not actionable, this is an observation. You guys are saying competitive. This is a competitive rate. All I've seen is this is an average rate. Define competitiveness. You have to figure out where you want to go to determine if you're competitive. So if you want to be competitive in making sure that energy is more accessible to certain kind of households, then the numbers might look different. But all I've seen is sort of, this is average, but I would just want to challenge the thinking and say that it's not necessarily competitive. Those are not one-to-one. So that's just commentary we can build off that later, but I want to put that out there with Dr. Smith's points.
Well, here are our bills versus our peers at a lot of different usage levels. You can define competitive however you want to. I mean, this is just.
Well, in the display of data is good. Don't get me
Okay,
wrong, right?
all
Like,
right.
like let me just peel all this back, right?
Yeah.
Like display data is good. This is highly informative, and half, at least my questions per se, are just trying to wrap my head around the rate structure and the anatomy. Trying to figure out where to make comments appropriately.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better suited towards the end. I'm more than happy to do that.
No,
too.
no, right now is the absolute proper time because I've only got one more slide. So ask your questions now, please.
Fair point. Let's go to the last slide then. That's good.
Okay, well, let's talk about this slide a little more. I just want to make sure that
Okay.
everybody understands this slide. This slide shows how the differential in the fixed charge versus the variable charge can move the ultimate bill around one way or another. That's what this shows more dramatically and puts numbers associated with it instead of sort of waving your hands about it does this or it does that. That's the actual answers there. So one of the questions that you come up with, well, you know, there are different groups of customers, as you mentioned, that you want to make sure are well served by your rates, I guess is a good way of saying it, right? And one of the groups of customers that I know a lot of the members of this panel have an affinity for, as do most people in this room, or let's hope everybody, is for our lower income customers. You want to make sure that your rate design is meeting their needs as well, right? And one of the things we want to show here is just that. So the next slide that I added in here, it shows we looked at all of our customers that have received LIHEAP funding, which is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program funding. That comes from the federal government. We looked at the population of our customers that received those funds over the past 12 months, over the last year. Those customers are customers that are income qualified. They have to apply and show their income to be eligible for the funding. All these customers, actually, we had 12 months worth of usage from, so we could make sure we were appropriately slotting them. And if you look at these customers, if you, again, mark kind of an average place, a typical place around 1,000 kWh, more of our low-income customers, if I'll use that as our definition of low income, LIHEAP, are above 1,000 kWh than are below 1,000 kWh. So what does this mean? Well, if I go back in time and we look at the EPB model here, 936 versus our 2050, at 1,000 kWh, we're lower than EPB, right? So, and if you go above, then we're way lower than EPB. And we have wildly different fixed fees. But our low-income customers have larger than average usage. And so having our fees arranged the way they are versus EPB overall has a better benefit for the low-income customers than if it was the other way around.
Well,
I'm just talking about numbers
I
here.
understand, and I appreciate this is great data. I think that the assumption you're making is that there is, and I think KUB has been a leader in trying to do energy efficient homes for low income. I know that is a program that is, so the goal is, I would imagine, and we'd have to go out and look on a case by case basis, but our experience in going out and looking at some of the low income customers is there's people that literally have holes in their roofs.
That's right.
They've got leaky windows. And so you are seeing customers who are in distress, who may have extremely high usage patterns because they're in substandard housing. And so your solution to that appears to be you want to tweak the rate structure so that you're not necessarily fixing the underlying problem, you're just giving them temporary relief and whatever. But I think the goal here, and which is sort of a comprehensive approach, is that you want to actually help those customers lower their usage. You want to incentivize behavior, not only with the low-income customers, but across the board, to incentivize energy efficiency, because the greenest electron is the one we never use, and probably the most humane electron is trying to overall be energy efficient with the stuff we do. So, I mean, I see what you're doing here. I appreciate it. But I think that if you have a commitment to trying to work with this customer class and get at the underlying problem, it's going to be to encourage these homes to be more energy efficient and drive them to the left of your chart instead of allowing the problem to persist.
Well, first of all, I would say we're not trying to do anything. I'm just trying to demonstrate what the data is. This is what the data shows right here, that under our rate design, if you will, our mixture versus a lower one, we're actually benefiting low-income customers. I'm just talking about data. We're not sitting there designing things to accomplish that. That's just what the facts are. Okay, I'm really not trying to make more of a statement about it than that. But I will say, and you're right, that KUB, and associated with a lot of different partners, are actively trying to better the housing stock. And that's the best way to help, ultimately, all of our low-income customers, as far as the utility bills are concerned, is by having better housing stock. And you're exactly right. If you were to look at this, we use 1,000 kWh here because that's how we normally look at all of our stuff on the electric side, is 1,000 kWh. But really the median household usage on residential customers is 930 kWh. And at 930 kWh, 60% of our low LIHEAP customers have more consumption than the median. And again, it gets back to what you talked about, Dr. Smith, that their housing stock is probably not the same as others. If you have a well-insulated house, If you have a newer house, your consumption is going to be less. And if you have the opposite of that, your consumption is likely going to be more. And all that's true. But I just want to demonstrate to the folks that are concerned about low-income customers that this isn't something that is a detriment to them, how we have designed, how our rates are at all. So I'm not saying it's benefiting them, but I'm just saying it's not a detriment to them.
And it's a matter of policy for the board and for the agency, or the entity. You know, the parable that comes to mind for me from the Bible is you can give somebody a fish or you can teach them to fish. And clearly you guys are giving them fish because you're, giving, but the goal here is to actually, I think, help that customer class through a matter of policy and incentives. And I think the overall, for that LMI customer class, that's one thing. But then you also have the larger society goal of trying to encourage efficiency overall, because I think we don't want to be a wasteful society. And so by having your market signal built into the variable rate, you send that signal more clearly than if you have it in a fixed fee. And so there's a number of reasons why we have raised concerns about the policy that the board has adopted about putting more of the weight on the fixed fee over the variable rate.
I have a question about the variable and the fixed fee.
Sure.
Does not all the fixed fee goes towards recouping debt or handling debt, right? I mean, I'm sure there's also service charges, and so. But how much do you mainly handle debt through fixed and not through the variable price of energy, or is it? Does that make sense?
I understand the question. You were fixing to answer, Mark.
I guess we look at the whole sort of consolidated picture of the costs that we need to recover on that. And it's not so much that, because we have this level of debt, this much of the basic service charge is reflected.
Well, I guess,
into that.
so, I mean, do you have targets, for instance? So, we anticipate that, I don't know, like 50 or 60% of our fixed cost goes to recovering debt, or no more than 20% of any variable cost, will go towards repaying debt. That way as to prevent it from getting it. I don't know. I mean, does that exist, or is that a mentality, or is there a different strategy that's been used?
I think we look at everything in balance and how we need to recover our cost. So I think,
So what I just want to highlight is that because of like that squishiness, it's going to be kind of hard to communicate to the end user where the value of the fixed fee, and then if there are any rate increases on the variable, where is that going, or as to what is that helping to accomplish? I mean, I think, but that's just something to consider, that if you're looking towards the messaging and tightening that up, that if that was made clear, it would be easier to message to the end resident.
I'm trying to remember if it was the last session we had or the session before, but we had a session before on cost of service and rate design. And under the cost of service and rate design, you have had outside consultants come in to look at what's the appropriate fixed fees to charge versus
Totally
not.
familiar with that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So that's part of the validation of the fees that we charge as well. And again, it all results in a bill instead of this tension between fixed versus variable. That is competitive.
Okay,
So
well, hold on.
Okay.
I want
Yeah.
to respond a little bit to your question. And it does get down to the policy choice of how you do cost of service analysis. And there's not a consensus across the whole industry about what that is. To be fair, to be straight up, KUB instituted the fixed fees without doing a cost of service study for a number of years.
Okay.
And we engaged with them and requested an updated cost of service study. And then one was performed, and we were able to get access to it. But so there are methodologies in cost of service studies that different choices are made. Historically, it had been the line drop from the pole
Right.
to your individual, and then the cost of actually the billing associated for the individual customer. Then utilities came up with a clever way of, because if you can capture more of the fixed fee, it's less weather variable and everything, and we call that, we started calling it lazy rate making because it was a way of guaranteed income.
Right.
But then they came up with methodologies to apply more and more of the fixed cost across the customer so they could justify increasing the fixed fee portion. And so that's where there's been, and it's not just been KUB, this has been,
It's industry
TVA has
level.
been encouraging it. TVA has actually put a fixed fee on their wholesale rate called grid access fee, and utilities have been sort of experimenting with trying to figure out ways to lock customers in to giving more money without having to deal with the variableness of their usage patterns.
Right.
And so this is a debate that's happening across the nation, but it is a policy decision that the board makes, and I'm not clear that the
Yeah.
board was presented alternatives to the various ways that they could have chosen to do this, nor was it probably fully articulated the implications of their choices, both positive and negative.
Yeah, my line of questioning was really to highlight the fact that are there some set minimums on the fixed rates that we just can't go below? And what the answers have highlighted is that it's really the squishy process. It's really whatever serves our financial output. And
There's an
so-
art and a
Well,
science to
if
rate
you
making.
look at
And
There's
this.
a lot of art.
I'm like absorbing this too.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want to
yeah.
presume that.
No. Hey,
No.
look at look at all the charges across the valley here. That's a good way of looking at the span. Everybody's not spending as much capital we are. Some of them maybe spend more, some of them spending less. But everybody in the electric utility in the valley are represented here.
Right.
And here's the range that's out there right now.
Well, and Mark, you need, and this cuts both ways for you guys.
Yeah.
The other thing that you need to understand is that in an urban place with a high concentration of customers, to serve each individual customer can potentially be lower
Exactly.
than if you're running miles and miles of line to get to a customer base.
Right.
Now, KUB is a little bit of a hybrid because they have a dense urban market, but then they also get up into some of the rural areas. So part of what's driving that variability is because they've got co-ops wired into this total amount here, which have very high cost of service per individual customers because they're in rural areas. And then you've also got the urban markets.
Right.
So it's nuanced. Now, I'm not saying it's not nuanced, but it's, there's more to the story than just, oh, we're in the middle here.
Yeah.
But I would say that it is not fair to characterize it as saying that the board was not presented with the information and was not explaining the alternatives as we decided how we were gonna set our rates. We absolutely were. We've seen this information. We've seen a lot of information about our customers' usage, what we know about their income levels, and we take that into consideration.
Well, I think what we're seeing right here is the influence of policy. Because now we have the CAP to provide extra input so that the board can reconsider and take maybe additional inputs.
Let me ask one question, since this is our final slide. Right?
This is our final
If you'd go
slide.
back one,
Well, which one, right there? Where?
the grid, the one that's more the grid
This
that you
one,
had.
Okay.
It looks like there's a kind of a bimodal distribution. I mean, you've got a bunch of them around 20 and a bunch,
right.
11 and 12. I mean, what explains that? I mean, is that for a couple of different philosophical viewpoints or something about the way the particular utilities? But, I kind of expected to see a little more, gradual distribution there, and wondered if that represents two distinct approaches.
You're asking, is there a method to this madness?
Right,
Why-
or maybe-
Why there's one or the other?
Well, if maybe there are two methods that, the 11, and also noting that we're really talking about a $10 difference for the most part. I mean, the minimum's
Well,
around 10
the
and
total,
the max
The total
is-
bill is
Yeah.
roughly the same.
Right.
Okay, as we have this discussion here, if you're talking about what persons are paying And their mailbox, roughly the same.
Right.
okay?
I guess what I'm
So-
asking is obviously what's underlying a lot of the discussion, I mean, good tension, but tension in the room about all of this, and it is an approach is how is the fixed fee determined versus the variable? You know, what should that fixed fee be? And it looked to me like that would indicate there are kind of two approaches that led a bunch of them to be around a little over 10 and a bunch of them to be a little over 20, and wondered if that represented two different viewpoints in the industry, or just sort of happened to work out that way.
I would say
far
a
as-
better way of looking at it is looking at it like this. We just had a 8 utility random sample of the bigger systems. And
Okay.
there's that bimodal distribution that you called it.
Right.
A better way to look at it is there's a dispersion of customer charges or basic service charges across all the utilities.
Yeah.
And here's what they are. I would say, well, I'd have to guess about other people's business, and I really don't want to get into that. So I can't answer. I am not aware of there being this, hey, everybody does it this way, but another group does it that way necessarily.
Well, I noticed
Now,
a couple of them, I mean, are some of those, I know that in Memphis, a lot of the nature of the rate stuff is determined, ends up potentially in front of council, right?
Well, clearly there are a number of utilities that have more political-based decision-making. I mean, you brought up Memphis, so, and you brought up the city council. So I'm not gonna say that influences their deal, but I'm just saying they have different, they have a different influencers than what we do.
We
So,
participated in the discussion in Memphis, it absolutely.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm not trying to be that,
I know you don't want to say it, I'll say it, because we interact with the city council quite a bit, but the fixed fee is a definite component to their decision-making and how they approach.
and that's
And a lot of the others have, I mean, you look at EPD is pretty low too.
Yeah.
And if you go back and you kind of track the course of this, it gets back to, and I may get this terminology wrong, but my staff will definitely have to correct me. There's been two philosophies in cost of service, whether you just do the sort of basic line drop methodology, which gets you to about $10, or whether you start bringing in these other expenses and spread them out over the broader system. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, it's just two different approaches, and it is a policy that the board has to decide which way to go.
Well, Jerry, and then let's take some other folks, like Mike had it.
Jerry has something to say.
I apologize if I missed this in previous meetings, but Mark, when KUB goes out to the bond market, and I'm not familiar with when utilities go, but what are the factors that the bond issuers are looking for? What are they, when you go to make your presentation to them, what are the key factors in determining the issuance and the rate?
I think the key factors are, one is the board's willingness to raise rates, to help cover cost. The fact that we have long-range financial plans, 10-year plans, we look out into the future on that. We have a balanced funding plan, the board's willingness to adopt rates more than just for a single year, but for multiple years at a time. And they're looking at the overall financial strength of the company, the key indicators on that. As far as the components of the rate, if you were going to ask them, just them, and this really has not come up in conversations, but, the more revenue you can guarantee, well, from a bondholder's preference, that's
That would be
okay.
my assumption. The less the volatility, the more I'd be more comfortable to give you a better rate on a bond. Fair enough? Generically.
Generically.
Yes. So with a fixed rate strategy, there's less volatility, I would assume, in your financials. Thus, playing this out, you could get a better bond rate, which saves money in the long term, correct?
That would lower your borrowing cost
Thank you.
at a high level, yes.
Okay,
But
are you saying that I just want to be crystal clear, because this came up in the conversation. Are you saying that your bond rating has been impacted by your choice of using
I would not say that at all.
Okay, good, thank you.
I would not say that at all. That was not, if we go back in time, let's say 2011, that was not one of the objectives.
Right.
Because the bond ratings have been pretty consistent over time, over that. It was more, and again, nobody's, I think, implying this, there was nothing nefarious about it. We weren't out to do anything. It was more of, you know, where do we stand across the whole valley? How is the best way to communicate this?
Right.
Everybody's going to benefit from the Century 2 program. And so the dollar, everybody pay the dollar. That's, in a high-level summary, what it came down to.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I just, Steve, it might surprise you to hear me say this, but you and I are a lot closer on this than you might imagine. It is first a policy decision, and policies can be changed. There's no question about that. Second, we both agree it's a lot of science and a lot of art, and I'll stop there. And I would just tell you, based on my experience, where I come down on this is because as one who cares deeply about the poor and who cares deeply about, you say environment, I say God's creation, you probably would say God's creation too. Finding the balance on that, because the things that I see, if we put a lot more in variable rates, the people who I understand all about market forces, I really do, and I know about incentives and how policy can drive people, can change behavior. But the poorest people, especially those who don't own their own homes, don't have the advantage of they're not going to make a whole lot of market decisions that will affect their life. So your primary argument, which I don't disagree with, is we need to do whatever we can do to A, minimize electric use, and B, use alternative sources to coal and other things that pollute the environment. But we're trying to find that balance between creating policy that ultimately hurts the poor, which we really care about, and doing what's best for the environment. And finding that balance for us, we may disagree about where that balance is, but that's when you start to talk about what is in the minds and the hearts of the board, that's the art that we're struggling with. And so when you do make your presentation, I would love for you to convince me that putting money into the variable rate is going to have a major impact on the behavior of poor people. I don't see it. I haven't seen it. I've looked. I can't find anything that shows me that. So that's what gets me angry sometimes, when people imply that what we're doing is hurting poor people, and it's not. This is really an issue that has to do with what's best for the country, what's best for the earth, what's best for the environment. But we can't afford, or we're not willing to adopt policy that leans that way at the expense of the poor people that we're here to serve. And I think that's where our heart is. I'm not saying that's not where your heart is, but I get very frustrated with, you and I both know that if we did go back on the fixed rate, particularly in the extreme months, the people would be hurt who use the most power. And so I just want you to understand, I've been flying that flag you fly for a long, long time. I really do try in my personal life to do that. But the board is trying to find a balance in policy, and that's the art. And we can disagree as human beings about where that is, and I don't think you're a bad guy, and I hope you don't think I'm a bad guy, but golly dang, it's just not, it's not simple to find that balance.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jerry, and I'm sorry that you're hearing it as representing what's in your heart. That's not, that's why I'm emphasizing this is a policy decision.
Thank you.
And it is a decision that good people can disagree on, and God bless, we're in a free country, and we can organize all the people we want to show up at your board meetings if we disagree with them, right? And so that's what makes this a great country. We can go to the city council if we want to. But what I'm trying to emphasize, though, is that I believe in a comprehensive policy. There is synergy between trying to send that market signal to be able to lower overall energy efficiency and also design, and it, you know, we're going to come to you. Several of us have been talking at the advisory board. I think that you all need to contemplate a low income rate overall. Now, you guys are going to reject it probably, but I think it certainly is within the bounds from a policy perspective for y'all to contemplate that. And I think that with energy efficiency investments and right market signals and increased awareness, that is the toolbox that's going to help the largest number of low-income customers and help the environment. And there's actually a synergy there. And I believe, based on the way y'all are approaching it, that you don't see that in a synergistic fashion. Basically, what you just said reinforces that for me. And so we will try, maybe unsuccessfully, to convince you that you could come up with a comprehensive synergistic approach that backs off of the fixed fees, does more on energy efficiency, and maybe even contemplates a low to moderate income rate that helps people who are truly struggling. It is certainly within your toolbox if you choose to do it.
And the last thing I would respond, thank you, and I'm looking forward to that. But I hope we'll all not lose sight of the fact that KUBs, we have our role in fighting poverty, but the real issue is crappy houses. The real issue is poverty. And one of the things that KUB is doing is trying to be a force in economic development to bring in better jobs and all. We're not going to solve the problem of the poor with better electric rates. It's not going to make that much difference. If we cut our rates in half right now for poor people, they're still going to be really poor. And so we really have to join forces to get better jobs and more economic development. And so I'll just leave it.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on one thing you said, Jerry, and I think everybody might not have understood it, but if you put more of your costs in the variable rate, if you have a cold month, people that are in bad housing has large bills, because you put so much of your costs in the variable rate that they're really sort of punished, if you will, on extreme weather events or a real hot summer month as well. So
Yeah, but
you understand, the two of y'all understand. I just want to make sure everybody else in here understands.
Yeah, but you have ways that you offer to levelize those payments out over multiple months. And so it is not that a single month is necessarily, because you have payment plans that allow people to spread that out. And that applies to everybody, it doesn't just apply to the low-income customers. And so the question is, in the months where they may have a single spike in January, but then they have low usage in the spring, how does that average out? Because, again, the fixed fee may be hurting them more in those shoulder season months, and then it may be the higher fixed fee may be benefiting them for the one or two sort of extreme weather events. So I think there's a lot more to this, it's not simple, I agree, but it's also not, you know, black or white one way or the other.
Let's have Steve, and then let's make sure everybody else can weigh in. I mean, we've got 15 minutes left, so.
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to make sure that I keep my brain focused on your presentation, because my background is running a profit loss center. And if I ran my profit loss center the way you run utilities, I wouldn't have had a job for it. It would have been a short time. Then I'm trying to wrap my arms around where you are. And I'm just trying to stay in the middle, to listen to everything instead of drawing conclusions. And I guess I'm going here to say you have presented, and you've presented well. Thank you. I mean, this was great. And now it's our turn to present. And we've kept an open mind to hear you out, and now it's our turn and we're asking you to keep an open mind and hear us out. Because this is not black and white. Because playing with rates, playing variable, fixed, I've done all of that. And it's situational, how I come up with those rates and how I charge people and do certain things. This is different for me, and that's why I really have to keep an open mind on both sides of the fence and say when we present, we hope that you all have an open mind to just hear us out, because there's something here that we can bring to the table. It may or may not work, but at least hear us out. That's all I gotta say.
I don't know if you guys do this internally at KUB, but there is this conversation about rates, fixed, variable, everything that's here. It would be nice to look at some internal statistics or internal numbers. I don't know if you guys do consider this internally. I'm sure you do. There's plenty of materials to consider whenever you increase a rate. But I wondered, using some of the data that you guys use for the home renovations aspect, the whole part where you're having improvements made to homes that are underperforming, using that data to sort of see and correlate it with the usage of data here and seeing how it could impact rates, because we have this average. We don't know the spread. We don't know, what households are getting hit harder than others. And we understand that there are moving pieces here, but having some other data underneath that might not work its way into rates, but that could or would be entertained by the board. I guess that's my other thing. I don't know what level of data you all get when considering rate increases, so that would be very helpful to see. What's the level of data that you're presented with? Because the higher level data is really helpful to start the conversation and start this road. And this might not be a meeting thing. This might be here's some documents, that we've considered. And I know it's all public, it's just hard to dig up. If that was provided, that'd be really helpful. But I just feel like that maybe sharing of data might actually, and this might dovetail into some other presentations, but that's just one thing I wanted to put out there. So that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say I appreciate this presentation. This is really helpful. It really made me understand where the benefit of fixed versus variable really is and who it's affecting. I guess my question may be for Dr. Smith, because when I look at this, if we were looking at EPB, which has the lowest fixed fee, and KUB, we're only looking at a difference of $5 on a 500 kilowatt total bill, which is where they're the people that are going to benefit by having a lower fixed fee. Is that significant to change their behavior? Because you're saying that if we decrease the fixed fees, we put it more on the variable rate, that's going to change their behavior. And it's going to really impact them financially.
Who is the they?
The lower income.
Well, no, I think you misunderstood me.
Well,
I think that, I think any time that you send a market signal in the variable rate, I tend to agree with what was said earlier. I think Jerry said it, that the low-income customers that I've interacted with, they are not usually in a position to be doing the forward calculation on the market signal that is being sent. So I don't disagree with that. But what I said was that the variable rate sends the market signal across the whole customer base. And I think it is absolutely true that there are people that make a decision, because you're saying it's $5 a month. If you spend $300 on a higher efficient air conditioner or a higher efficient refrigerator, and that appliance is going to last you X number of years, there are definitely people that will make a decision about that investment based on that. And that investment is both good for the KUB system because it is more efficient, uses less power. It's good for the environment. It's good for the consumer because it ultimately saves.
okay, but But we're talking about the rates here, right?
What's that?
I mean, we're talking about the rates, we're not talking about an air conditioning unit. And when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing a $5 difference between KUB at 500 kilowatts total bill versus EPB, which is $59.30.
Okay, so $5 a month, 12 months, that's $60. You have an appliance that is going to have a 10-year life, and so you can do the math, and you can see that for some people, it actually does. It really matters. I mean, we deal with this all the time. Those market signals help drive
So
customer behavior.
$60 a year is gonna make, is a significant enough difference. Whereas if they have like a big month, like where they have a huge month, like this month, where they're having maybe using more electricity to heat their home, they're gonna actually gain more than that in savings by having more of a higher fixed fee and less of a variable rate.
Well, I don't have the data behind your assumption there, but what I'm saying is.
But you're assuming that that's going to be better for them if they have a lower fixed fee, and I'm questioning, well, is it really going to be better for them even at this, even if they're at a 500 kilowatt total bill? I mean, it's $5, and it's helping out a lot of more, just like you said, it's helping out so many more people who end up using it on the higher end and than on the lower end. So the greater value, just like we were saying, for the lower income consumer might be just how it's set up right now.
I'd have to look at an individual basis based on what's going on.
I
But
agree
think,
with Amy in the sense that, I think how you presented it before, and this is how I interpreted it, it seemed like a black and white fix. If you bring fixed cost lower and let the variable rate stand, that will increase, or that would affect behavior more. And that's at least how it was communicated. Maybe that's not accurate, maybe that's not the whole picture.
okay.
But
Yeah.
that's how I perceived it too.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when we initiated the campaign to challenge the fixed fee, what we were seeing was, and Mark, you could go back and show, we were seeing a dramatic uptick over a roughly 10-year period because the fixed fee I think when we went back to, let's say, 2010, it was $6 a month. And it went from $6 a month to $18 a month in this window, okay? And it was on a trajectory to go up. And when we were trying to engage with the KUB board about what their future intents were and trying to get documents, it looked like that they were on a trajectory to continue to raise the fixed fee, all right? TVA had sent a very clear signal to TVPPA, which was the collective of all of the local power companies, that they were encouraging them to raise the fixed fees because TVA was embracing the fixed fee language. And you begin to see across the country that this issue was it was on the rise. We fought a fixed fee battle in Florida with Gulf Power. We fought one in other parts of the Southeast. So what we were seeing was that the utility market as a whole was moving from a variable rate model to a fixed fee model. And so we began to point out that if you continue on this trajectory, and this is the model you're going to, it's going to further de-incentivize energy efficiency investments. It's going to have regressive impacts on customer classes and whatever. KUB kind of blew us off initially, to be quite honest with you. We had trouble getting board members to meet with us. We had so we organized a campaign and began to bring people together and began to have an open and honest debate about this in a very public way, all right? And so it has stopped, at least temporarily, based on that organizing that was done. And so I think there is a legitimate argument to have about what's the right balance. But when we initiated the campaign, this was the methodology that was being represented that they were going towards, was increase more and more the fixed fee. And you can see the rapid advance that took place over that period. We launched our campaign I think probably in 2018, 19, and, you know, and then was able to get at least a temporary freeze on what's going on. So, yeah, you can go in a moment in history and have the argument you want to have. I'd like to see the data. I mean, we can sit down if you want to and really get into it. We can also look at national data. There's a lot of information about this. But I think the question is, what's the policy going forward, and are we fully aware of the implications of it?
Well, we are about at any time, I would say a couple of things. Well, obviously got two variables here. There's the equity based on income use argument, and then there's the market for investing in other sources, or, you know, energy efficiency as market cues play into that. And our next meeting, we'll have to figure out how this exactly works, but the argument you're talking about, Dr. Smith is going to present.
Yeah, I think we would just like, I mean, we've had 4 meetings here of KUB presenting stuff. I mean, we would like to take a portion of the next meeting and present, you know, our perspective on the issue, and, you know, just make it available for people. You don't have to agree with it. It's a free country.
Right.
You know, and there may be others who want to present also. I know there's been a group that has been doing analysis on fees, and I think analysis on rates with low income and sort of what's going on. Right. They've got a data set. I don't know how we can get their information in front of all the folks, and, you know, there's several of us have had, you know, very limited conversations. We don't have, right. You know, we're not.
I think what we come to before, agreed to, is we would have presentations from the group here, and people could get info to them to present. We would rather than just
sure
open that up, and I think that's the way to go. But that doesn't preclude that those alternative presentations. I'm aware of the couple of groups you're talking about. So that will be what we'll do at our next meeting, and then you could see I guess we'll talk between.
Yeah, we can dialogue in
about
between.
how that would work and how much you would need and so forth.
Meeting, so.
And again, to remind everybody, this isn't like a group that's going to be taking a vote on anything. I mean, that would be somewhat a function of who's on the group. That would be not appropriate. But the purpose is to make sure, and we have board members here, that this information and other perspectives are in fact those which board members have access to, and that community members in the community have more open access. So that I think that's why we're here, and I think this has been helpful today.
Dialogue is a good thing.
Yeah, so there's nothing else.
And Bill, who is presenting in March?
Pardon me?
Who's presenting in March?
Well, that depends. I guess we really haven't worked out. I mean, Dr. Smith is going to, as a member of the group, is going to present. Now, right now, you've been in reactive mode. I mean, you know, being able to present an alternative approach to some of the materials we've seen here for at least, we'll see how much of the meeting, and then we'll talk about what the next substantive area is we want to get into, or that's up to the group to decide where we want to go next.
Yeah, I can say this, and a couple of the other folks who are, I think, interested in presenting, or at least have expressed interest in presenting, are not here. So we should, you know, Bill, I'd be happy to work with you, and we can bring some of those into dialogue and trying to figure out how we structure some of the presentations. But, you know, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy would like to present at least a portion right. of our perspective on a few of these issues, and then I think there are other people that have some ideas. Right. You know.
Is it the Alliance presenting, or is it you as a community, a member of the community advisory, presenting?
Yeah, no, I think
outside groups.
Right. I think as a member of the group, it's you.
Well,
and
look,
you can have some folks to help you.
I would like to have. There are members of my staff that are particularly well versed on these issues, and so I may have them in attendance with me and present a part of the presentation. I mean, we've got a room full of KUB people here. And so we are at a asymmetrical disadvantage to be able to present our information. So I would ask, and I think that I was asked to be on the committee based on the fact that the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy had been instrumental in bringing some of this stuff forward. But, you know, of course, I will be at the will of whatever is appropriate. But I think we should be not in the mode of trying to limit information here. I think the goal should be to try to have a productive and broad dialogue so that we have access to all the information instead of it being one-dimensional.
I agree.
Okay?
I guess an obvious question for me is, what's the goal, the purpose of the presentation? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, it's to share information. I mean, I think that there is an alternative perspective, and there is other data sets from the Department of Energy and other credible entities that should be brought into dialogue with us about this thing. And I mean, I greatly appreciate what KUB has done, but it's largely based on, you know, their historic decision-making, which is fine. But I think there are other good people can disagree on this, and I think we just need to bring it into dialogue, and that's what I understand that the advisory committee is about. But if we want to have a one-dimensional conversation, you know, let's just call it what it is. We're being controlled, and we're having a one-dimensional conversation.
Well, I feel like the information that's been presented has been very objective. I don't think it's been all one-sided, but I appreciate you presenting in March, and I look forward to hearing to it.
Great, I'm glad you'll have an open mind.
Right, I think in everybody, in all of this, I think, you know, there are different approaches that are out there based on different philosophical assumptions and other assumptions about, I think, what you raised, what is in fact a meaningful market queue? Is there enough leeway in here to really, and that, you know, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, you know, to change behavior, short-term or long-term, and that's, I think that will all be valuable information to have. But I guess ending with, it's sort of interesting, you know, this is KUB, and in fact within TVA, we're talking about a public entity with, as we started earlier, there's a certain cost that has to be paid. It's just how that's going to be distributed. And it's not like it's being higher means that KUB is like making, you know, profit for stockholders or something. I mean, everybody's in this for their view of what's best for the public here, you know. And we heard the impact when we're talking about the equity argument. I appreciate the presentation on who right now is impacted by the rates at what level. And then you could talk about the, you know, other variables in the equation. And to me, this is all a healthy thing that will be more information that can be, the public will have aware of and board members will be aware of. So that as I understand is that's why we're here. And, you know, I think inevitably it is going to be, like I say, a little positive creative tension in all of this. That's just the way things work when you're dealing with important matters. So if there's no other questions, I guess we'll plan on getting together in March. What date is that? Does anybody have their calendar? What's the March date? March 3rd.
And Bill, I think something to the point of who's presenting, I think with the fact that we don't have all the members here, we'll certainly make sure that anybody who has an interest is able to, and Dr. Smith, obviously you are on that list already, so I think that collaboration of kind of setting all that up, the timing and everything will work collaboratively with all of the members of the panel to make sure that if anybody does have a desire to have an opinion shared, that they have that platform as well.
Yeah, and it may be that there are multiple presentations and we need to have a couple of meetings because we took, 4 or 5 meetings to get through it here. So, you know, I think this is the whole purpose, to have the dialogue. So I don't want to see, you know, if multiple people want to present, I don't want to see our time crunched down to like 5 minutes because we have that experience when we come to the board meetings. We're rushed to try to get across a lot of information. Sure. The whole purpose of this is to have a broader, more open and meaningful dialogue. So yeah, we could potentially have multiple meetings for various people.
Right. That will be up, a lot of this is very much up to this group. And you're right, I mean, having a presentation at a board meeting is a whole different animal than having an
You're
atmosphere
telling
like
me.
this. Yes. Or a council meeting or
Right,
anything.
right,
I mean, so
right.
that's why you meet in this kind of setting, I think enables the kind of discussion that we're having. Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all in March.